Welcome back to the PFF NFL show. Trevor Sikkema and Ollie Connolly here with you guys to do a handful of things on this In the Trenches episode for Week 14. First and foremost, going to recap Bengals-Cowboys Monday Night Football for you guys, discuss that game, everything that went into it, a little Michael Parsons contract talk because now he's making us talk about that a little bit. So we'll get into everything that went into that game. And then I'm very excited for this episode. Ollie's going to give us his most underrated players in the trenches. We're going to talk about offensive tackles, talk about interior offensive players, edge rushers, interior defensive linemen, and get an underrated player, most underrated player in Ollie's opinion, which the guy watches more trench players than you can imagine. So I'm even excited to hear who these players are. I'm sure that we've talked about them a little bit on this show throughout the season, but excited to get to that. Ollie, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great. I'm trying to figure out how quickly I have to move to North Carolina if Bill Belichick takes this UNC job. How quick should I get there?
You can get here pretty quickly, I should say. As somebody who lives in Charlotte, North Carolina, we get an American Airlines hub right in Charlotte, so there's going to be a plethora of flight options for you anytime you want to pull the trigger and get over here. We'd love to have you, my friend. It'd be great to be in the state of North Carolina with you to talk. But, dude, the Belichick stuff, we weren't even going to talk about this, but how wild is that? Bill coaching college? Can you imagine Bill recruiting? It's funny. It's funnier than Saban because like Saban at least Saban's a hard ass, but like he grew he's had so much time doing this. I don't want to say grew up doing this, but like he spent so much time in college and it's sort of like how he came up as a head coach, and then obviously his time in Alabama with Dynasty and everything. Bill Belichick trying to relate to the youths, trying to relate to the kids, but I cannot see it, man. I can't. I think it'd be hilarious. I don't know. I would love to see it play out, but man, that part of it is very funny to me.
Oh, I desperately want to see it. And Saban, to your point, he at least did the TikTok dances, right? He understood at some point. I still want the 5-star edge rusher. I'm going to have to just show myself here and do the dance. I'll do the Brian Kelly thing. I want to get draft picks in this building. Bill is not going to be doing any of that. He'll be designating someone on assignment. And even when people say, hey, Dion doesn't go on the road, it's like, I think there's a pretty big difference when Dion FaceTimes you, even if he's not on the road, to when Bill picks up the FaceTime or time face or whatever he even tries to call the thing.
When that came up, obviously this means a little bit to the NFL. We're kind of going on a little bit of a tangent here, but like, man, a lot of people looked at the potential head coach jobs in the NFL and they were plugging Bill Belichick into one of them. They're like, oh, well, Bill Belichick's absolutely going to get one of these. To me, I don't know if this speaks the same to you or if you've kind of like paid attention to Belichick's side of things a little bit more than I had. I'd love to hear your opinion on this, but to me, Belichick entertaining this job enough to take it if it's offered makes me think that, well, he's probably put some feelers out there throughout the NFL and none of the teams are really interested in hiring him. It's almost like his time as an NFL coach has kind of come and gone. He had the dynasty with the Patriots, but nobody's really looking to hire Bill Belichick because there's going to be a lot of head coach openings that we see on average. What is it, 7 or 8 that we see every single year? So we know there's going to be a handful of openings, and we thought, oh, surely Bill Belichick will get one of them with him being a free agent. But with him being so willing to take this North Carolina job, Ollie, I'm not so sure that was even a guarantee with 6 to 8 head coach openings this year.
No, I mean, there's 3 already open and none of them have spoken to him. And he's available to be spoken to anytime he wants. He could not be more open saying, please call me right now. And no one seems to pick the phone up yet. And I've done some reporting on Belichick in the UNC situation. And what he's done over the last year is build this giant Bible of how he would run a program. There's a major college one, then he has an NFL one too. And when you saw the reports like, hey, he blew the UNC university away in the job interview, he just dropped the Bible on the table and said, here is my presentation. This is what I would run a college program like. I have the pro one as well. And when he goes into an interview, whether it's high school, college, head coach, whatever he wants to do, he just brings that and says, that's what it's going to be, your call. So I just don't think there's a team around there right now with the way these front offices are run these days who are going to say, cool, all the power goes to the emperor. He picks the strength and conditioning staff. He picks the data analyst. He can bring whoever he wants into the building. It's his program. That's just not going to happen in pro football, I don't think, anymore, unless it's someone really desperate or more of an older legacy family ownership group who just buys into all things Belichick. The only way he can get that kind of control to just do everything his own way would be at a college program. I think that's why he's taking the UNC job so seriously.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fantastic point. It's the big reason why we've heard a lot of skepticism about, like, okay, sure, Belichick the coach, you'd love to get him, but Belichick the GM, do you have to sign on that too? Is it like a package deal? And it seems like it is. And in college, like you said, it's something that's a lot easier to do. And at UNC, not that they haven't been winners, I'm not trying to say that about the UNC program, but there's also not a ton of pressure at UNC, right? I mean, like if you have great seasons, great. I mean, they will give you some resources, they will support you. The school has a lot of money and a great brand, obviously, with the Jordan brand and everything like that out of North Carolina. We know that their athletic program is great, even beyond just football, certainly basketball at the very top of things. But if he were to go to like a USC, that's maybe a nightmare scenario to me, because it's like all the expectations in the world for him, all the cameras, all the spotlight. Okay, what did Bill Belichick do this week? And we're going to have a little bit of that if he goes to North Carolina, but it's less pressure. If he doesn't really succeed in North Carolina, if he goes 7-5, 8-4, something like that, obviously it's not ideal, but it's not going to be like the biggest thing in the world, like front page ESPN or something like that. The expectations aren't crazy. So as crazy as it is to think, I didn't think that he would be a college coach. I don't hate the idea. I really don't.
But why would you think a 72-year-old who's never coached in college, you started the Baltimore Colts? That's where he started his career, the Baltimore Colts. Then they don't exist anymore, right? Why would you think he would start getting into the college game at 72 years old, bringing his son and younger staff or not? But I do find the notion people say, oh, he may struggle at the college level, so laughable. You go and watch the Patriots defense in the final year, how innovative and fresh and interesting they were compared to what the Patriots is doing now with an all-young staff, right? And all the young people who're supposed to have fresh ideas. You don't think that guy could schematically get himself around Darby Swinney? I think he'd be okay.
All right. Now I hope we see it. Now I really do. Just like talking about it now I really hope that we see it. So I didn't plan on going into the Bill Belichick topic to start the show, but that was actually a fun one for us to start things and get the blood flowing a little bit here. Let's talk about Monday Night Football. Let's get into the Cincinnati Bengals and the Dallas Cowboys. Final score 27-20 in a walk-off touchdown from Ja'Marr Chase there at the end of the game to give the Bengals a win. It was very back and forth, Ollie, between two teams that, let's face it, not great this year. Disappointing, I think, is a common word that we could use for both of these teams. And injuries have gone into that, certainly, for both squads. And I think for the Cincinnati Bengals, it was just really a slow start to the year that they have not been able to overcome. And they still are a dangerous team. You know, they're still able to score a lot of points. We saw that the previous week with them playing the Pittsburgh Steelers. And then, obviously, this week being able to score 27, getting above 25 points once again. But just your overall thoughts. You know, Joe Burrow, a monster game once again. More than 350-yard passing. Ja'Marr Chase, 177 off of 14 catches and 2 touchdowns in this game. You know, the Cowboys offense a little bit more quiet, as you would expect with Dak Prescott not in there. Rico Dowdle having over $130, which is cool to see. But overall, your thoughts on this game, and really, what's the big takeaway for you? Because the Bengals get the win, and it's nice, right? It's nice to get reminded that you win, but they're not really playing for playoffs at this point. They're kind of playing for draft order, and every win that you get gets you further away from the top of that draft order. So just your major takeaways and your just thoughts on Monday Night Football.
Yeah, I think my major takeaway ties to the thoughts of the game, which is it's so remarkable to see one team so reliant on the stars. We just don't see this in the NFL, right? You get star players, but there's usually a foundation laid by, you know, the 4th round pick at left guard playing well enough, right, to elevate everyone around them. With the Bengals, it really is 2 guys, sometimes Brown, obviously Higgins as well when he's fully firing. So you really get 3 guys. It is that simple that they go as those 2 guys go. And to either have defensive breakdowns to allow Ja'Marr Chase to get free, or just him playing so successfully, or Burrow this year being a guy who can move around and create more than he has at times in years past and just break out of structure and go and find throws down the field. It truly is remarkable that it is those guys. Then defensively, it's Hendrickson, and that's it. And so that was the same thing on Monday night with those guys. And then just bigger picture, it's like, I cannot believe quite how disappointing it is. When I step back, I thought all season long they could get in a hot streak, right? Maybe defensively they just get a turnover or 2 more, even if they're not very good. The offense stays firing, and they could either crawl back into a wild card race, and it's the team you just would not want to see in the postseason, right? The classic cliche, like, I don't think the Bills would really want to see those guys if the offense is rolling that well. Now that we're getting closer and closer, even winning this game, to maybe being eliminated next week, I just think it's one of the mother of all letdown seasons for any franchise when you have probably the best quarterback in the history of your franchise, not just previously, not just now, but probably forever. I'm not sure they'll ever have a guy play this well in that uniform sustainably as Joe Burrow is playing. Probably the best wide receiver in the history of your franchise, playing as well as he ever has. He actually last night, Trev, had the most production on out routes in the history of a pro football game. That is not normally a thing where you rack up production. That's how special this guy is. He's getting yak on out routes, conversion routes, routes that hit the sideline, you move on, you keep the chains going. He's so special, so slippery, so creative. He can take off and explode down the field and get a bunch of yak on plays that should not really have yak. So they got these two magical players. And to just have it be this much of a letdown by not being able to field a competent defense, still not having any kind of evolution in the offense year after year after year. And I get they've still been really productive with it. It's what Joe Burrow wants. So if that's what he's happy with and it's successful, I get that. But it just leads me all the way over to I know he's not under a ton of pressure, but I just cannot imagine rolling Zach Taylor back into this thing for another season. If this was Sean McDermott in Buffalo and we saw what happened this season, in Cincinnati, in Buffalo with Josh Allen at the apex of his powers, there would be no conversation about Sean McDermott returning.
Yeah. I mean, the head coach thought is very interesting. And on the NFL Stock Exchange podcast, myself and Connor Rogers, we did a Fixing the Bengals episode, and we look at a lot of things, right? We look at ownership, we look at the general manager structure, we look at head coaches, we look at how likely it is that they might move on or make a change, and if they do, we offer some candidates and everything. And just the way that the Bengals operate as a franchise does not make you feel like Zach Taylor will be gone after this year, especially if, over the next 4 games that we have here. Obviously, it's a nice win on primetime and Monday Night Football on the road against the Cowboys. And, depending on how they end their schedule, if they still get 2 wins here down the stretch, it's hard to believe. Even if they get 1 win, it just happens to be in like one of the last 2 games. It's hard to think that they would move on from a guy who got them to the Super Bowl. It feels like next year would then be the hot seat year for Zach Taylor instead of moving on from him this year. If they do move on from him this year, it feels like it would sort of be a bucking of the trend of how the Cincinnati Bengals normally operate. They are normally one of the slower teams to react and make changes.
That's the kindest way I think you could put that. Cheap is the other word.
Well, that's right.
You don't want to. And to be fair to them, they are actually fielding, people throw that out all the time, right? The Bengals are a cheap franchise. That's true. They don't have a big scout staff, all the typical stuff where you would kind of rack up the cost of running a team. But the actual team on the field is pretty expensive. They put a ton of investment into the defensive line, cash-wise, 3rd in the league, draft picks-wise over the last season, 1st in the league in defensive line, just misidentified talent, have had injury concerns, paid guys who got too old too quick, right? Guys like Jermaine Pratt, gave him an extension, fell off a cliff, was vital to them when they had the Super Bowl run. My thing with Taylor, it's nothing personal about him. I think he's probably like a net average coach, right? You drop him somewhere else, he would do an okay job. Don't think there would be a major distinction if he was in Tennessee this year, for example, than if Callahan was there this year. I don't think he's a major needle mover. I just look at them and go, well, what is he actually adding to the fold, right? Defensively, they were good when Lou Anarumo had the right pieces and had a great style for a specific era in football, basically a 30-month stretch where it clicked for him with the right group of players. Joe Burrow in the offense, it's Joe Burrow's offense. They don't change the thing ever. No matter who's calling the plays, no matter who comes in as OC, no matter who builds the game plan, it's his offense all the time. So he's not adding anything to the building beyond kind of like the big picture running of the program, and that's not going very well. Then what is the point? I don't understand totally what you're saying. I don't imagine it will happen, but just us talking it out, like what could they do to kind of kickstart something next season? They need someone, I think, who can actually elevate element to the roster. I would be the first team to go and call Dan Lanning at Oregon and say, you fancy the NFL? You want to be in the NIL portal? Let's go and get someone who could move the needle for us defensively, run a program, and Burrow's going to handle the offense anyway, so we'll just let Burrow and Chase get on with that.
So I do agree with you there. The biggest pushback I think that, like Cincinnati or other people might have to that is not necessarily that you're wrong, but that coaches and quarterbacks, it's not a guarantee that it would just always work out, right? You talk about, hey, it's Burrow's offense. He's going to kind of run it the way that he wants to anyways. We've seen that's just not always the case, right? We get coaches who come in, whether they're defensive coaches or offensive coaches, who might just change little things here and there where you mess up a great thing. And we're seeing Burrow play at an MVP level right now. And honestly, the way that Joe Burrow is playing, I think there's 2 sides of the coin. You can either look at it as what a disappointing season this has been for the Bengals, and how it feels like you are wasting a Joe Burrow MVP season. Or you could sort of look at it on the other side of things and be like, look at Joe Burrow throughout his career in Cincinnati with Zach Taylor. He's just been incredible when he has been fully healthy and playing a full season. Could that certainly exist if there were a different head coach in there? Yes, I'm not saying that it can't, but I can understand Cincinnati's hesitancy to be like, we don't want to risk at all whatsoever messing this up. And we have seen before with Aaron Rodgers is an example. And I don't know, there's things of Aaron Rodgers' situation that obviously could sort of like go into this, but like Aaron goes from Green Bay, and it was him and LaFleur, and he goes to the New York Jets, and at first it was Nathaniel Hackett, and just like now it's just like different coordinators here and there, man. It's been a nightmare, and Aaron Rodgers looks nothing like the player that he was in Green Bay when he had sort of that coach and quarterback chemistry with Matt LaFleur. And there is an element of, even if you were to take Zach Taylor away, let's say you take Zach Taylor away, let's say you go get Dan Lanning, let's say you go get a defensive coordinator, a CEO type, whatever it is, and you say to Joe Burrow, no, this is your offense, just run it however you want. If maybe he doesn't have that system of checks and balances there like he might have with Taylor, do things go off the rails? Does he think, okay, well, I think that things work a certain way, so I'm going to run it like this? And if it doesn't work like that, does he have the answers then to collaborate and change things and all that? So that would be my main pushback to that. Is I don't totally disagree with you that Zach Taylor, it's a little bit of like, the Office Space meme where it's like, all right, so what exactly do you do here? And so there's a little bit of that goes into it. But on the other side of things, is rolling well with by far the most important part of a franchise. And if you can sign to Jamar Chase and bring him back, at the very least have those two guys, even if you didn't have T. Higgins, that's something that I would be very cautious of moving on from, even if there's been some deficiencies and some disappointments elsewhere that the head coach could impact.
Yeah, and that's why I was suggesting, like you said, going in a CEO type, more of a defensive mind. Because, I don't think you bring in Kellen Moore and it's suddenly Kellen Moore's show and it's all about Kellen Moore's ego and harpooning Joe Burrow's effectiveness. But look, they've never changed the offense. Every time they try to change it ever so slightly and things go wrong, they pull the ripcord, they go right back to the offense they ran when they first got there. It's not as though it's true like a Zach Taylor offense. This isn't like a play design situation where you go with Matt LaFleur and it's really design heavy, right? And it's all the motion and movement and creativity and play action stuff that he had to find a way to get this mind meld with Rodgers. How much would he accept of the play design stuff versus the things he liked? With Joe Burrow, it's just in the gun and I spray it around. That's it. That's when they're at their best. That's when they're successful. Everything else they try typically falls apart. It's not a heavy motion-based group, but they've upped that this year. It's not a turn-the-back play-action group. And the classic easy things coaches can add in to help the quarterback out. None of that exists anyway. It is just a drop back from the gun point guard offense. So you could keep Dan Pitcher around. He can be the OC if he wants to be. You can bring someone in. I would find it very hard to think someone could come into this group with how poor the line's played over the years. If they get Burrow, Brown, Chase, and Higgins, and a coach would find a way to make this group worse. Now, maybe Burrow has a step back slightly. I mean, he's been unbelievable this year. He's probably been the best pure quarterback in the NFL the last 3 seasons when he's been healthy. So maybe it's somebody that's just a natural step back, but I just don't feel like anymore outside of maybe just general, like you mentioned, vibes, or maybe there's not a confrontational stance, but the way Taylor builds the game plan is instructive in this stuff that we just cannot see behind the scenes. I just don't get the sense that he is so majorly involved in the way they have success. When it's just Burrow from the gun, throwing out routes to Chase for the highest output in the history of a football game, that's not really like a coaching decision to me. That's not great strategy or scheme. We've got two of the best. We got two basically first ballot Hall of Famers in the prime of their careers, and they just have this great connection dating back to college. I don't know how much Zach Taylor has to do with that.
A couple of thoughts just on the Cowboys, if you have any of them, before we move on here to some of your underrated trench players. Rico Dowdle has a great game on the stat sheet. It wasn't super dynamic beyond kind of his offensive line. His offensive line actually played decently well. You have Brock Hoffman, Tyler Smith, Cooper Beebe, all those guys grading a 79 or above for an overall blocking grade there for the Cowboys. So decent work along the offensive line that has suffered its injuries and had some guys in and out of that lineup. Cooper Rush, it sort of is what he is at this point. 16 for 31, 183 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. CeeDee Lamb by far leading this receiver group. Not a lot of options outside of him. And then on the defensive side of the ball, DeMarvion Overshown getting hurt sucks. I mean, there's no doubt about it. But then, you look at Micah Parsons' side of things, another elite pass rush grade from Micah Parsons. That makes 4 on the season, 2 in a row. He had 13 pressures, 30% pass rush win percentage. Didn't have a sack, but had 10 hurries in this game. Parsons was incredible, as he often is when he is out there and when he is healthy. And so it was just another game that gives him the ability to sort of demand whatever he wants contract-wise, which if anybody caught the pregame interview that he had before the game, he said, there's not a big difference between $40 million and $30 million in terms of like how much he's going to get paid per year for this next contract. And he said, well, it's not it's not super important that I'm the highest paid player in the NFL. He's like, I want to win games. I want to win games here in Dallas, which is great. You love to hear that if you're a teammate. You love to hear that if you're Jerry Jones. You probably hate to hear that if you're David Mulugheta, who is his agent. But a lot of things goes into that. But any high-level thoughts when you watch the Cowboys, who now 5-8, tied with the Cincinnati Bengals? Actually, now both of these teams picking 11th. The Bengals have the 11th pick, and the Cowboys have the 12th pick here after Monday Night Football.
Yeah, I thought you hit on most things, right? I thought the offensive line pretty impressive, and I understand they're playing against the Bengals front, and it was worse the second half, but they drove them off the ball for much of the first half. Then BB goes down, they even hold up pretty well there as well. I thought their defensive game plan was pretty all over the place for most of the game. They were blitzing Burrow a lot, which is like a do not do situation. They backed off it slightly in the second half, which made a ton of sense. But then the final play to Chase, essentially the touchdown play, came when they tried to light Burrow up again, just leaving Ja'Marr Chase one-on-one. I don't know why that would ever be in the game plan when you don't exactly have all that great stuff on the back end. And when you have Micah Parsons, you said, playing at that level, that's one of the joys of having a player playing that well, right? If you blitz, yeah, you get him one-on-ones, but he's so dynamic, such a difference maker, and wins so quickly off the ball that doubles aren't always as effective against him as they are against other people unless you get more creative with the double. So I thought that was a bit peculiar. When the game is on the line, I get Mike Zimmer. When the game's on the line, he's going to bring heat. That's just who he is. Everyone in the stadium knows that. So do the Bengals. That's why they're allowed to get a quick throw off to Ja'Marr Chase. You can go make a play and win the game for you. So I thought that was a bit concerning. But Parsons just being walking right back in from injury at the level he's at, as you mentioned, the back-to-back just outrageous weeks he's had is something to tide them over to next season, where when you look at the roster now, you go through it is just so lacking in talent. Given they didn't make the investment last offseason, you would just think, well, they must believe there's going to at least be some internal development. Maybe it's just penny pinching, but they must believe there's some talent hiding under the surface that we'll find out over the course of the season. It took them till this week or 2 weeks ago, essentially, to figure out Dowdle was the back anyway. They were splitting carries with the guy who was so clearly the most productive back they have on the roster. So still tons and tons of question marks heading to the offseason, none more so than you mentioned. How much are you going to pay Micah Parsons? He's the best player on your roster. He's probably the best pure edge rusher in the NFL alongside Myles Garrett. How much are you going to pay? Maiden Hudson, I should throw in as well. How much are you going to pay him? How much will that compromise what you can do on the rest of the team when you've paid Parsons, Dak, and have to pay CeeDee Lamb at that rate?
Yeah. Now this is going to be a fascinating offseason for both of these teams, honestly. You know, you've got the two wide receivers who go into the offseason for the Cincinnati Bengals needing new contracts. Ja'Marr Chase isn't a free agent, but he's really going to be pushing for a new contract. He tried to get one last summer, but this summer really pedal's going to be to the metal. And then obviously what's going to happen with the Dallas Cowboys and Micah Parsons. You know, you signed CeeDee Lamb, you signed Dak Prescott, but the way that those negotiations were handled and how they came down to the wire, I mean, it felt like that was sort of mishandled from them. You don't want to do that with Micah, especially a player who will go out of his way and publicly say how much he wants to win for your team. You want to keep those players happy and motivated to play as best as they can, as long as they can for your franchise, especially when they are that talented. Let's get into your most underrated players in the trenches that you have 14 weeks into the season here. I think we'll probably do this again maybe in a couple of weeks when we review and we give out some awards and things like that. But we might not be able to recognize all of these players within a single award. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to really shout out a lot of different guys. We're going to talk about an offensive tackle, an interior offensive lineman, an edge rusher, and then an interior defensive lineman. We'll start out with offensive tackle. And your guy for most underrated offensive tackle in the league, or just the guy that you wanted to talk about in this light, Zach Tom, the right tackle for the Green Bay Packers. Zach Tom's been grading very well for us this season. He's played over 800 snaps at the right tackle spot, 86.4 overall grade. That's best on the Packers. 87.3 run blocking grade, and then an 82.3 pass blocking grade. So he's been very solid in both situations. He's only given up 17 pressures and 2 sacks all season long. Talk about Zach Tom, a guy who you think is the most underrated offensive tackle in the NFL right now.
Yeah, and I should just say with these up front before people get upset, I had a long list. Like when Trevor mentioned me about this, I had a long list of like 120 players. Like there are so many plays I could get into. I
appreciate you narrowing it down a little bit from 120, or we'd be here a while.
I knew that Trevor would not put up with me doing 9-hour monologues on every player in the league.
That's a you and John for the podcast, and it's like 16 hours long. It's like, all right, this is part 16 of the most underrated players in the NFL.
The thing I love about Tom, honestly, is just how disciplined he is with everything he does. It is pure technique stuff. And he actually only really gets in trouble when he plays the real best of the best. And the real best ones, Daniil Hunter, Myles Garrett, Max Crosby, these guys bring unusual, unorthodox things because they're so special and gifted. And they can fit 2 or 3 moves in where no one else can. Or you're so scared of just natural pass rush moves, right? That they can start doing unusual things to get you. And that's the only really time he loses, is when particularly Daniil Hunter got him a couple of times when they played, obviously hitting him with classic Daniil Hunter, who knows what he's thinking, what he's doing type situations. But he's just so steady and solid in everything he does. Such a slick mover, stable base, fluid, switched on to picking up anything, edge pressure, any kind of blitz, simulated look. He just picks everything up. I just think he's so in tune with the group as a whole. And Jordan Love raves constantly about, like, I just feel like I have a solid right side of my line where I can step up and climb through, and it just puts him in a solid mental space, either get rid of the ball quickly or go and create. You mentioned some of the run game stuff. He is probably right now, to me, with Trent Williams having some injury issues, not quite as dominant this season, the best pure wide zone lead guy we have in the league, and then is excellent as a cut-off guy on the backside too. So he's kind of the foundational focal point of their kick and go run game. And then this is a straight pass pro guy. He can get beat. He's not perfect, but he's one of those guys where he will lose 2-3 reps a game against the true tier 1 guys, and who doesn't, right? That's why the tier 1 guys, that's why they got to get paid $30-40 million if they're Micah Parsons. But he just stonewalls and shuts down the tier 2-3 rushers, unless his technique gets away from him ever so slightly. But for the most part, he's just as solid as they come, which for a 4th round pick center kicked out to right tackle, can play anywhere across your line. I just think it's one of the most impressive developmental stories in recent history.
Yeah, he's an interesting type of player because I feel as though the Packers, when they draft, they're one of those teams that have thresholds, right? They're a big threshold type of a team when it comes to, arm length and just like how guys are built when it comes to their defensive linemen and offensive linemen specifically. I think corners as well. They've had in the past, thresholds where they don't really like to go below a certain size when it comes to corners when it's drafting. You look at Zach Tom, and you mentioned just a versatile offensive lineman. If you match up his measurables, against some other offensive tackles, I mean, it's 14th percentile in height, 17th percentile in weight, 21st percentile in wingspan. But then you get to the athletic stuff, the 40-yard dash, the vertical, the 10-yard split, the broad, the 3-cone, the 20-yard shuttle, all of that above the 90th percentile. So just an athlete that they do gravitate towards. So maybe not a measurable threshold, but an athletic threshold that they like to go after with Zach Tom. And I think you bring up a really good point. Myself, I'm kind of talking to myself a little bit here. When we do scouting, sometimes we get a little too caught up in, okay, well, let me draft the guy that could block the very best of the best, that has the potential, whether it's the length or the athleticism or whatever, to draft the very best, to go up against the very best of the best. And the fact of the matter is that if you find a player who brings you all of that stuff, length, size, athleticism, IQ, experience, all of that, Ollie, they're getting drafted in the top 5. So if you don't have a top 5 pick, you're not going to get that football player. So then when we evaluate these offensive tackles that get picked a little bit outside of the top 5, and we talk about, well, he could be the type that could maybe block the very best of the best or whatever it is, sometimes you lose those guys who are just like, yeah, all right, he might struggle against the very best that there is in the NFL, but against anyone, tier 2 and below, he's going to handle pretty well. And I think that player can often get underrated in a draft class because we're chasing those guys that can defend the tier 1 and everything like that. And sometimes you got to get those guys that really just week in and week out are so damn good for you. And I think that is what Zach Tom has been over the last 2 years specifically. Last year, his first year as a full-time starter, he ended the season with an 80.3 overall pass blocking grade. This year, he's got that 87.3. So he's increasing that floor and that ceiling, I think in his second year as the right tackle there for the Green Bay Packers. So maybe not the type that they typically go towards when it comes to athletic measurables, but somebody that has been fantastic for them, and I think is a pretty good scouting lesson of you don't have to always shoot for the stars when it comes to the offensive linemen. Sometimes you got to get the guys where you go, yeah, I got faith in him. I want to put him on the right side, and we're not going to worry about him too much. But that's also not to insult how good he has gotten and how much he has gotten out of his talent as well.
Yeah, and the way he wins with IQ and understanding what his physical limitations are versus what his physical pros are, right? You mentioned he played inside. He has unbelievable grip strength. And something he does a really good job of is just contorting edge rushers once he's engaged to get them slightly off balance, to buy him the time and beats needed to properly plant his feet and then get to his anchor. His straightaway anchor, someone running through his chest, is not as solid as having a mammoth 6'7" tackle out there, right? Sometimes he just gets rocked back and dropped onto Jordan Love. But because he's got such solid grip strength, that if he can engage early and kind of get that person shuffled off their base where they have to get some kind of second surge move or try and get a dip around, his feet are so slick, so good, and his hands are so good that he can just move them and kind of get them into this kind of off-balance fight. Let's see who's got the quickest, slickest feet shuffling backwards, and no one can keep up with him because he's so good in a tight space. So he's really found ways to kind of take what his skills are and make sure, even in situations where it can be difficult, right, a really wide rusher with a giant headway to run at him, finding ways to make sure they can play on his terms. That's a lot of what line play is, right? Don't let guys get after you. Go and dictate the terms on your own. It's easier to do when you play inside. He's been able to take that and move it to the outside. And as you mentioned, in terms of just kind of development and scouting plays, it's a good example of, in the offseason, go and take your center if he's big enough and passes just the minimum threshold, and go and see if he can play in a more valuable spot if it's considered more valuable to you, right? Why not take guys in the offseason, cross-train them, and figure out if they can play out there? There are different ways to win on the edge than just being the long guard guy who keeps people off their pads. Though I will say with Tom, what is funny is, one, he loses the same way every time when he loses. He bites on an inside step, someone goes around him, can't establish his base properly, gets his feet tied up. But he likes to play in the hand fight with long arms for a guy who does not have long arms. And sometimes, particularly against the best guys, like, hey, Zach, like, you got to realize your own physical limitation in this stuff. I get these guys are really difficult, really, really tough to block. That's just not going to be your game. And you seem to get through it against everybody else. And then when it comes to the best of the best, and maybe your best stuff doesn't always work because they're so special, he then starts getting into these panicky reps, right, where he's chasing himself. And you see it specifically against Hunter. He's played a bunch of top edge rushers this year. The Hunter one is really instructive of how he can get himself into binds. But just to have that level of elite to very good to elite production as a run blocker, specifically in one mode of run blocking. This isn't a guy who's going to maul people off the ball from the right side necessarily. He is more of a technique, finesse, wide zone type player. But to get that, plus the really stonewally pass protection for a guy who's costing you $1 million a year until they got to figure out a contract extension this offseason, I guess, is just the best possible production you can get from that spot for the value.
Let's move on to the interior offensive line. Hjalte Froholdt from the Arizona Cardinals is the name that you decided to pick to torture me and make me say here on this show. Hopefully I pronounced it correctly. The man from Denmark, who's played on both sides of the offensive and defensive line. When he was at Arkansas, he started out as a defensive lineman, moved over to the offensive side, played a lot of different positions, and he's bounced around the NFL. Started with the New England Patriots. Shocker, they took a versatile foreign offensive lineman and tried to develop him. So started with the Patriots, was drafted in the 4th round there. He's played for the Houston Texans. He's played for the Cleveland Browns. It feels like it's been like 2 years-ish at every single spot that he's been. Now he is with the Arizona Cardinals, and you're not the only one to point him out as a guy who has been playing very, very well this year, or at least above expectations. So underrated. Talk to me about Froholdt, what makes him so underrated amongst that Cardinals offensive line that is still rebuilding, that he could be a piece there moving forward.
Yeah, I just love him. He might be the most vicious player in the NFL. I mean, he is just out for blood every single time. He plays for the whistle like no one else in the league. When you go and watch them play the Lions, and I don't know if I should say this, I don't want to get Mr. Froholdt in trouble, but he's like going after Brian Branch after every single play for the whistle. He goes to find him to put something on him. He's like, I know this is their best player. Let's try and get him figured out early on in the game. And he's just been the pivot point for them getting to what I think is most diversified run game in the NFL. It flows through all that they do, right? And you can go see with his splits really clearly when they are winning games, when they can set the terms with the run game, how much more impactful he is versus when it's just drop back and we've got to go and play and I'm one-on-one dropping back. He just isn't quite that kind of player. When they're rolling and they can get more to the play action world, more of the RPO world, they can get the run game going. He's a key factor of it. He's also, when you watch how they actually run the offense now, there's so much of what they do which is ripped straight from Kelsey Hurts single man screen game, right? It's some kind of RPO or a quick screen that is essentially we need to get our center, who's a really good athlete, out in space as quickly as possible, and no one else is pulling or moving. It's just a center, it's a single man screen, and they run a bunch of that stuff with him. His game has declined over the season. It's interesting to watch how teams evaluate, scout, and then attack individual linemen. So early in the year with him, because he's like you said, bounced around a whole bunch of places, hasn't always been a center. There was this notion to try and get after him with late pressure into the A gap, right? Let's bring a blitzer down. Let's bring guys from unusual angles. We don't think he can pick that up. Whereas if we just put someone over him and he's just a scrappy, brawly type interior lineman, he can fight with anyone, right? He's a mauler. He's not always a clean technique guy. He actually handles the stuff off the ball really effectively. Where he gets in trouble is just someone lined up straight over him when guys get into 5-man front and say, it's you, Froholdt, one-on-one with our best interior lineman. That is when he gets into some trouble and he gets panicky and his technique betrays him. He's a big time, just drop his eyes, latch on, and try and ride through the rep as long as he can, rather than someone who'll just like stun or shepherd or move someone around. So there's technical flaws still, and teams are now starting to get after him. If you go and look at the splits, I imagine, of the grades and the pressure rates over the course of the season, I imagine they're ticking up as people figure out how to try and get after him. But I just think there's still plenty more there for him to learn, because he's so switched on and connected with the blitz stuff that I think that there's a lot there mentally to still tap into.
I was going to say, he's under contract now until 2026, so they've got the option for him for a couple more years. You talked about how it started off hot for him, it's cooled down a little bit. Do you feel good about him as your center going into next season if you're the Arizona Cardinals?
I would, because I think he opens up the offense for you. There's not a whole bunch of centers usually. They have to usually be unbelievable Kels-like athletes to actually open up and can be key functions of like the design of the offense, right? And I think they use him that way. I mean, the way he just crushes and stuns people on one-on-one man block situations, he's like a walking double team on his own and a lot of that inside stuff. Like, that's not normal stuff. His ability to grab someone, manipulate them, twist them to create a hole on his own is really impactful to what they do. If Petzing is staying there and they are a run-based play action shot offense, I don't know what else you would want from that. Would you love more from him picking up stunts and twists? Absolutely. Those players are hard to find. Everyone would love to have a center who could do all those things for you. If you get those guys, you got to pay $15-16 million a year, right? So it's just really difficult. To me, I think as a kind of under the radar, we have a gem who we know is unbelievable value for us, who fits exactly what we want to do. I think he's perfect. If you said to me, would Cincinnati go and pay him a ton of money to play in a drop back, 3-step from the gun game, I'd be like, we might be in big trouble, guys. This is a bad evaluation. We should not be giving him all this money, though we love him as a staff. But for exactly what they're doing, I think he's absolutely perfect.
So let's move on to the other side of the ball. Let's talk about defensive linemen now, your most underrated defensive lineman that we've got in the NFL so far this season. For edge rusher, you chose Denver Broncos edge rusher Nick Bonitto, who, sort of a pass rush specialist type, but man, he has been on fire. If you look at his whole season, he has earned a 76.3 pass rushing grade for the Broncos this year. But if you look at his performance just since week 7, so week 7 through week 14, 85.3 pass rush grade. He's got 7.5 sacks. He's got a 17% pass rush win percentage. He's got 31 pressures. This is a player who I find myself constantly using as a comp when I'm doing scouting for a lot of these smaller pass rush specialist type of defensive linemen at the college level who are very, very successful. And there's normally 2 or 3 every year that are sort of built like Nick Bonitto, a little bit smaller. You have a specialized role for him, but very clearly, like in Denver's defense, what we're seeing right now, valuable. I mean, when you're able to get after the passer the way that Nick Bonitto is, that holds a ton of value, especially from what we have seen from him over the last 7 weeks when it comes to just that success basically everywhere doing pass rushing. So your thoughts on Nick Bonitto? Let's hear about it. One of your most underrated players here on the defensive line.
Yeah, and I don't think it can be overstated what you said in terms of kind of the league-long splits, right? You mentioned the early portion of the season there. In those first 6 weeks, he had 16 pressures, but 7 of those were unblocked scheme, Vance Joseph creative pressures, or cleanup pressures. What he's done since is all on him. It's me. There's no scheme help. There's no cleanup coverage stuff. It's me. And the pressure rate would put him 3rd in the NFL across a season of guys who have 100 snaps. That is like A+ tier 1 of 1, right? Type production. You're talking Hutchinson levels of production from a guy who is a pure speed bend type flyer off the edge. To your point, when we watch these guys coming out of college, you say, well, yeah, he's explosive. He gets to the ball quicker than a guy playing, in the ACC at tackle. Maybe he's a 6th, 7th round pick. It's like, how often are you going to beat someone at their stance at the NFL level? These guys are unbelievable athletes. They're quicker off the ball than you are, and they know the snap count. So you might be in trouble. There's no hand claps, right? These guys are shouting. You got to figure the thing out. It's hard to time up. And it also coincides with him moving from the left side of the line to the right side of the line. So now he's going up against right tackles. Like that change in the production when he starts taking off as his own guy, having crazy production without scheme help, goes from him moving from the left side of the defense to the right side, facing great left tackles. And in those sacks you mentioned, 6 of the sacks after week 7 have come against a double team or chip. So this is not just a guy based on profile with the speed and burst off the ball, ripping off the line of scrimmage. Guys can't get out of their feet, right? Feet aren't clean, and he bends around closer to the quarterback on wins. He is breaking through doubles. He is spiking back inside. There's some spin moves now. And the thing I love about him, and what I think I'm going to take into this offseason evaluate to the college guys, just tell me who has the best radar. And not just the best radar in terms of getting up the field and bending and cutting the arc down, right? You can see that really quickly. Those guys go in the first round. I get that. But the guys who can't do that and then have to work back inside, how many guys get stuck at the top and get run around the arc effortlessly because they don't have the tenacity, the fight, the strength at the top, the redirection skills to close back inside? And how many guys can just stop on a dime, right parallel level to the quarterback, and disengage quickly and accelerate off contact? And that to me is the difference in Bonitto this year. Some of the numbers were decent last year, right? They were pretty solid numbers, but the overall play wasn't that great. The difference for me this year is just the nuance and the different ways he's winning and his ability now to get level to a quarterback, disengage, and accelerate off contact, which just was not there in college and was not there early in the pros. It was purely I either win off the line and on my angle, or I don't win at all.
So that sort of brings me into my next question about evaluation. When you watch these players coming from college to the NFL, how much leeway do you give these smaller pass rush specialist players? Like, is it something where it's like, man, you almost want to take a chance on all of these guys because you've seen this production at the college level, or are you more strict about it? Would you say, hey, what Nick Bonitto is doing this year, not something that you can expect every single season? Because there's a lot of, you go back to sort of the Bill Parcells saying, where Parcells says, well, the NFL can only deal with what the college game sends them. So if edge rushers are getting a lot smaller at the college level because the game is trying to get a lot faster, and I feel like we're seeing a lot more of that lately, I feel like there are these small pass rush specialist type of rushers that we're seeing in every single class now. Are you willing to give those guys a chance, or are you still saying like, hey, there's a pretty high bar if you're a specialist? Like, I'm not just giving all of these guys a chance. It's not like all of them can work out. You have to be sort of a special player in that regard to really work out? Or do you think the schemes are good enough to where you mentioned all the unblocked pressures, you just need a guy who can get from point A to point B really quickly on the defensive line? Do you think there's going to be more of that?
Yeah, I think it's majorly scheme dependent, right? If you're on those mugged front teams, you need the speed off the ball. The shock factor is everything. So then I'd be more happy to take it. These players are always, for me, those ones where I end up getting excited and hyped about them, where I start moving them up my personal board the closer we get to the draft, after being kind of technically disappointed and marking them down earlier on. But if I was with a team, I'd be like, those guys are not for us, and we'll just, shake the hand of everyone who takes these guys, and the two of them are successful, we'll say good luck to them. Good job by you guys. I need the power. I need the mass. I want to be able to crush the pocket from outside to in. The speed bend guys don't do it for me, unless it is that I have Flores, Vance Joseph, Mike McDonald, a true mugged up defense where I want to be able to move guys and bounce them around the front a whole bunch of different ways. I think what's interesting about Bonitto is he's just become a more multifaceted rusher anyway. You would never have been able to see that in college. It's one of those guys where you mentioned the game getting smaller. A lot of these guys are playing in overhang slots, right? What's the difference between some of these guys and Quay Walker if they're stood in an overhang position? It's like, well, is he a coverage off-ball backer for us? Is he going to be a pass rush specialist for us because they use him like that on passing downs? It is so tricky now to figure out, even in your initial eval, which reps to take for which position you want them to play. If they're playing you on these tight base fronts in college where there's 3 down linemen, and sometimes they're a true off-ball linebacker, and sometimes they're a get-after-it pass rusher on late passing down. So it's a really, really dicey one. I would just always default to, can I find Trey Hendrickson? Is there any Trey Hendricksons rolling around out there? I'll take a chance on 3 or 4 of those guys. Hope for my best. They'll at least be impactful because there's just the size. And the small guys, we've seen how many of these guys, Trev, they get to week 2 of the season and the team's like, yep, no, can't get on the field. Doesn't matter. The speed isn't good enough. The size isn't good enough to get washed out in the run game. Can't play them.
Yeah, it is tough. There is a physical prerequisite, it feels like, for a lot of these players. And I'm not going to lie, I was a little bit lower on Nick Bonitto when he was coming out of Oklahoma because of that reason. I was going much more towards that there is a physical prerequisite and a mass prerequisite that you have to play at the pro level. And I felt like Nick Bonitto could give you some solid reps, but you talked about the development I think is really important for them. You mentioned an overhang defender. Before we move on to the last position that I want to get to, explain that overhang defender term, because you're talking about like different types of linebackers, and I'm following you plenty, but overhang defender I think is one of those terms that like sometimes they'll read like, okay, overhang defender, an apex defender. They're like, okay, what is this? What are we talking about here?
Oh, yeah, we get to apex cover downs. Your head starts spinning. Mine too.
Right,
Everyone's got different terminology for just saying linebacker.
Don't even get me started with money backer, which I feel like can mean something different for like every team at the college level.
Money backer, a way to sell coaching courses in the clinic off season. Let me tell you, that's what that is. That's just a safety. That's what that is. The overhang defender is just someone who aligns between the slot and what would normally be like a detached tight end. And again, that's difficult. So we've seen the slot receiver, detached tight end, and the tackle. A guy who stands in that little corridor there rather than over or outside the shoulder of a tackle, or over or outside the shoulder of a slot receiver, detached tight end, something like that. So someone who just sits in that corridor between the two positions, that's your overhang defender. He's overhanging the tackle.
So you got to have, and I mean, when you play in that position and with that much space, you have to have a very versatile skill set. You mentioned, okay, a guy like Nick Bonitto or a guy like Quay Walker, these are kind of like different types of players, right? These are off-ball linebacker types or more like on-ball production type of players. And so it is just one of those ways where not every scheme can play this type of a player. You almost have to have like a specialized player that you feel good about to put in this alignment. It's not like, all right, we got a big guy, you're playing the 3-tech or like a 1-tech or something like that. Not every team, even if you're a defensive coordinator who loves to incorporate an overhang defender type of a player, if you don't have the right guy to run it, I think you're going to be in trouble because the roles that they have to play are very difficult. But I just wanted you to explain that for the people, and obviously you did a good job doing it. Last guy that we're going to talk about, interior defensive lineman, Poona Ford from the Los Angeles Chargers. Poona's having a great season. 83.1 overall defensive grade. He's been fantastic as a run defender, but more importantly, he is having his best pass rush season of his career. You go back to his rookie season when he was with the Seattle Seahawks, playing a little bit less, not quite a full-time player, more of a rotational player, but earned an 88.2 overall grade and a 90.0 run defense grade. But what he is doing this season, 6 seasons later, is his best yet. And part of that Jesse Minter defense and a big part of it up front, winning in the middle. Talk to us about Poona Ford here and the season that he is having for the Chargers and in Minter's defense.
Yeah, and the run defense stuff is the more impactful thing probably because their run defense has been so terrible for so long and has been much improved this season. They've slipped away kind of from the midpoint of the year to now. But the fun stuff is just the pass rushing. Getting a 5'11 guy up the field, this kind of like squat guy with crazy pop off the snap, is a really fun thing. And he has, I would say, he's only got 3 sacks a season, but they are 3 of the highest quality sacks you will see of an interior guy. We're talking dropping spin moves on Cesar Ruiz, who's looking everywhere, no idea what has happened to Poona Ford's in the backfield. He's hitting snatch traps on Joe Tooney. He's gone good on good competition, Lindstrom, all these different guys all season long, and can even just barrel over them. This little bowling ball just rolling through people. He's so short and stout, but with good flexibility, so he can kind of get into a interior bend against these guys and get underneath their pad level and then just kind of burn through them, dipping around. And then he can also just bully people off the ball. He is one of the top pocket compressors in the interior we've got in the league this year that is outside that top class, right? The Jones class, the guys everyone knows. You just go and watch any Chargers game, just pull up, you watch it on Sunday, and you'll just notice after 2 drives, like the inside seems to be sat on the quarterback's lap an awful lot. And then when you look up or you go find figures or you put the film on, it's the same guy over and over again. It doesn't matter if he's doubled, singled, whatever it is. He just compresses the pocket in such an impactful way that everyone around him is feasting. So even if his numbers aren't quite as high as you maybe would hope for, the quality of the numbers he is producing is as high as you will see from anyone. 22 pressures, and they are really, really high level quality pressures, but then everyone else is getting the action, right? A classic high five player. Someone else gets the quarterback. He has to high five everyone when he knows deep down, I made that happen for everyone involved. I hope they slice off a portion of the salary for me. And it's actually getting better as the season goes along, I feel like. It's not one of those ones where he had a lightning hot start, their run defense played pretty well, they changed the structure, and he slipped away. I think he's actually been improving as the season's gone on.
Poona's been fantastic, so much so that when I do these fixture franchises, any team that needs help in run defense, I give him Poona Ford, and Chargers fans, they say, stop taking Poona Ford away from us. We want to keep him. That's how good Poona Ford has been. Make sure you go follow all of Ollie's great work over at the Read Optional Substack and the Read Optional Podcast, also the Audibles and Analytics Podcast as well. Appreciate everybody watching and listening to the PFF NFL show here, the In the Trenches episode. We will see you for a Week 15 recap next week. See you guys then.